Her children lovingly kept her jewelry collection. That's the story you've been told. What actually happened? Caroline and John let Sotheby's auction it off for $34 million. Over 1,300 lots, cataloged and numbered and photographed for a glossy sales catalog, spread across 4 days in April 1996 at the auction house's York Avenue headquarters in Manhattan. The jewelry went, the furniture went. Books, paintings, a humidor, even a footstool from Caroline Kennedy's childhood. All of it crossed the block. When the last gavel came down, the total reached approximately $34.4 million, a house record for a single estate sale that would stand for years. Every major piece in that collection tells the same story underneath the beauty. Jackie Kennedy's jewelry wasn't assembled by love. It was negotiated by lawyers, financed by guilt payments and prenuptial deals, and ultimately liquidated by her own heirs. No video has ever laid out the complete money trail, piece by piece. That changes now. Jacqueline Lee Bouvier's understanding of wealth began with her father, John Vernew Bouvier III, a Wall Street stockbroker everyone called Black Jack. He had the wardrobe, the deep tan, the loose charm, and the social connections of old money. But the Bouvier fortune was eroding fast. Black Jack drank hard, gambled freely, and spent with the confidence of a man who assumed the next trade would cover the last bar tab. Her parents divorced in 1940, when Jackie was 11, and her mother, Janet Lee Bouvier, quickly remarried Hugh D. Auchincloss Jr., a man whose estates at Marywood in Virginia and Hammersmith Farm in Newport provided the grand backdrop of Jackie's adolescent years. Those sprawling properties, those stables and gardens, belonged to Auchincloss money. Jackie lived inside genuine wealth for years, but understood the distinction between residing in a rich house and actually controlling the checkbook. That gap between appearance and financial reality shaped every significant decision she made about jewelry, marriage, and money for the next 5 decades. One piece predates all the financial maneuvering, and it's one of 2 pieces that other videos skip entirely. The Bouvier brooch, an 18th century sapphire and diamond cluster brooch in a pendant-style setting. Deep blue sapphires massed in a tight floral arrangement, ringed by old mine-cut diamonds, whose facets throw soft, fractured light. The metalwork fine enough and old enough to predate the American Republic itself. Those sapphires carry the kind of saturated, velvety blue that modern heat-treated stones rarely achieve. Dense, warm, intimate. A piece meant to be admired up close rather than across a ballroom. Black Jack Bouvier gave this to his daughter. Unlike virtually everything else in Jackie Kennedy's eventual collection, the Bouvier brooch arrived with no lawyers present, no prenuptial clause attached, no negotiated quid pro quo underlying the exchange. A father gave his daughter something beautiful because he loved her. Remember where this piece came from, because nothing that follows it shares that simplicity. When Jackie entered the Kennedy orbit in the early 1950s, she was stepping into a family that treated capital as a precision instrument. Joseph P. Kennedy Sr. had built a fortune estimated in the hundreds of millions through Wall Street speculation, Hollywood studio investment, real estate acquisition, and liquor importation. He spent that fortune with the cold focus of a man who understood that every deployed dollar was an investment in the family's political trajectory. Joe Kennedy didn't give gifts. He made placements. The women who married into his family quickly learned that generosity from the patriarch came tethered to expectations. Jackie, with her Bouvier eye for beautiful things and her deeply personal understanding that beautiful things require someone else's money to sustain, was walking into a world where jewelry would function less as adornment and more as a receipt, proof that a transaction had occurred, that a deal had been honored, that an arrangement remained in force. In June 1953, John F. Kennedy proposed to Jacqueline Bouvier. The original ring featured an emerald paired with diamonds in a setting that was elegant but relatively understated. The kind of ring a young Massachusetts senator with access to family money but not yet a national profile might choose. Early photographs from the engagement period show a ring that reads differently from the famous later version. The proportions are quieter. The stone sits in a more traditional arrangement. At some point after the proposal, that ring left Jackie's finger and was sent to Van Cleef and Arpels, the storied Parisian house headquartered on Place Vendôme, for a thorough redesign. What came back was a fundamentally different piece. Marquise cut and round diamonds now flanked the central emerald, building out the setting into a far more visually commanding configuration that catches light aggressively, fills the finger, reads on camera and in newspaper photographs the way the original simply couldn't. Undeniably stunning. Also, undeniably, an upgrade. Jewelry enthusiasts remain genuinely divided on which version was more beautiful. A significant portion believes the original was prettier, simpler, more confident, the kind of ring that trusts the emerald to do the work without a supporting cast of diamonds competing for attention. Others argue the Van Cleef redesign elevated a pleasant ring into an unforgettable one. But the financial reality is blunt. Even Jackie Kennedy's engagement ring, the single most symbolically personal piece of jewelry a woman owns, was subjected to revision and escalation before the wedding took place. Some biographers point to Jackie's aesthetic perfectionism, others to Joe Kennedy Sr., who stage-managed the family's public presentation down to the finest details. The answer is probably lost. The fact of the redesign speaks for itself. The financial bedrock of the marriage was established early. Multiple Kennedy biographers, among them C. David Heyman and Edward Klein, documented that Joseph P. Kennedy Sr. arranged substantial financial payments to Jackie as an incentive to remain in the marriage despite JFK's compulsive, relentless, barely concealed infidelity. The figure most consistently cited across independent biographical sources is approximately $1 million, structured through Kennedy family trusts and financial instruments designed by the patriarch to ensure his son's political career wouldn't be destroyed by a divorce splashed across every front page in America. Whether a single lump sum or a series of installments varies by biographer. The core claim appears with enough frequency across enough independent sources to be treated as serious historical reporting rather than gossip. And the implication for the jewelry collection is direct. If the financial relationship between Jackie and the Kennedy family was transactional from its foundation, compensation for performing the role of loyal political wife, then every piece she acquired during this period existed within a framework of negotiated financial incentives managed by the patriarch. One of those pieces, consistently overlooked, is the twin acorn ruby brooch. Two acorns rendered side by side in deep crimson rubies set into warm gold, their caps textured to mimic the rough surface of real acorn tops, their bodies smoothly polished to let the rubies glow. The stems connect at the top in a delicate gold branch, small enough to sit on a jacket lapel without overwhelming it, but those rubies are vivid. That particular pigeon blood warmth that has made rubies among the most coveted colored stones for centuries. JFK gave this piece to Jackie during their marriage. Given what Kennedy biographers have extensively documented about his affairs, the brooch occupies genuinely uncomfortable territory. It may have been sincere love from a man who was, by many accounts, deeply attached to Jackie, even as he was incapable of fidelity. Or it may have been a peace offering, the kind of beautiful object a wealthy husband presents after a particularly flagrant episode to reset the domestic ledger. The rubies can't tell you which. The gold is silent on the matter. The twin acorn brooch exists in the collection as evidence that jewelry given within the Kennedy marriage carried an ambiguity the romantic narrative prefers to ignore. Through the White House years, the collection expanded, and in purely aesthetic terms, it was magnificent. The sunburst brooch became one of Jackie's most recognizable signature pieces. Its design radiates outward from a central cluster in textured golden rays, each ray slightly different in length and width, creating the impression of light exploding from a single point. Pinned to the lapel of a clean-lined wool coat or centered on the bodice of a simple dress, the sunburst organized the entire outfit around itself, turning a garment into a frame for a single, luminous focal point. Kenneth J. Lane reproductions have kept this design in circulation for decades, and the piece remains so personally resonant that one viewer recently commented, "I have a copy of the sunburst brooch." That sentence, proud, specific, personal, captures exactly why the aesthete audience watches these videos. The beauty is real. The financial architecture underneath, it's what changes the meaning. Jean Schlumberger's designs from Tiffany occupied a different register entirely. Schlumberger was among the most imaginative jewelry designers of the 20th century, a Frenchman whose pieces looked less like traditional jewelry and more like small organisms, botanical specimens, fragments of an enchanted natural world rendered in gold, enamel, and colored stones. His signature enamel bangles featured bold, saturated colors laid over textured gold surfaces in organic patterns that seemed to pulse with warmth against Jackie's wrists. They became fixtures on her wrists. Not precious objects to be protected, but working tools of daily elegance. His brooches featured flora and fauna abstracted just enough to feel modern, while retaining the lush detail of a naturalist's sketchbook. Jackie acquired multiple Schlumberger bangles and brooches over the years, and the pieces she acquired from Tiffany during this era would later figure prominently in the Sotheby's catalog, each tagged with a lot number and a pre-sale estimate that bidders would blow past within seconds. Schlumberger bangles that had circled Jackie Kennedy's wrists carried an emotional premium no appraiser could quantify. Pre-sale estimates for pieces like these were set conservatively by Sotheby's specialists, who understood that celebrity provenance could double or triple a result, but couldn't predict by exactly how much. The final hammer prices proved the specialists right to be cautious, and wrong about where the ceiling was. Jackie also mixed fine jewelry and costume pieces with equal confidence, a habit that fascinated observers at the time. The triple-strand pearl necklace she wore with relentless consistency was a Kenneth J. Lane simulant. Faux pearls, beautifully crafted, but fundamentally costume jewelry valued in the hundreds of dollars. She paired them with genuine gold and precious stones, and the effect was a deliberate style statement. Jackie Kennedy's elegance was about selection and composition, about knowing which piece served the outfit, regardless of whether the materials were real or reproduced. The faux pearls meant that the most visually recognizable element of her jewelry wardrobe cost almost nothing, while the real money was concentrated in pieces civilians never saw up close. The public image was accessible. The actual collection occupied a different financial universe entirely. Those same faux pearls, when they finally crossed the Sotheby's block in 1996, sold to Linda Resnick, the California philanthropist and businesswoman, for a sum that made seasoned jewelry dealers shake their heads. Simulated pearls worth a few $100s sold for over $200,000, because the buyer wasn't paying for nacre. She was paying for the name, the provenance, the mythology. Every piece in the auction carried that same invisible surcharge, but the faux pearls made the economics of it absurdly visible. Costume jewelry, priced like treasure, because of whose neck it had touched. Dallas, November 22nd, 1963. The assassination ended the marriage and transformed Jackie Kennedy into the most iconic widow in American history. It also placed her in a genuinely precarious financial position that rarely gets discussed. She received a presidential widow's pension. Secret Service protection continued for her and her 2 children. Income from Kennedy family trusts flowed, but Jackie was sustaining a lifestyle calibrated to Kennedy family scale wealth while possessing sharply limited independent resources. Joe Kennedy Sr., the patriarch who had funded her compliance, managed the trusts, controlled the flow of money, had suffered a catastrophic stroke in December 1961 that left him severely incapacitated. The man who'd been her primary financial guarantor within the Kennedy machine was no longer operational. JFK was dead. Bobby, who'd assumed many of the family's leadership functions, would himself be assassinated in June 1968. Jackie, at 34, possessed enormous cultural capital and a jewelry collection worth a significant sum. Her ongoing financial security depended on arrangements that had lost their architects. So when Aristotle Onassis entered her life as a serious romantic prospect in 1968, the personal and the financial were inextricable. Onassis was one of the wealthiest men on Earth, a Greek shipping magnate whose fleet of tankers and cargo vessels had generated a fortune measured in the hundreds of millions. His pursuit of Jackie combined grand Mediterranean gestures with the instincts of a man who'd spent his adult life closing deals. Jewelry. Onassis lavished on Jackie reflected his characteristically extravagant style, pieces that announced themselves, that sparkled as prominently as his presence in any room. But the Kennedy family wasn't going to let their most valuable cultural asset enter a new marriage without contractual protections. The man they dispatched was Senator Edward M. Kennedy, Ted, the last surviving brother, who had assumed the family's leadership role and, functionally, Jackie's seat at the bargaining table. Ted Kennedy's negotiation of the prenuptial agreement before the October 1968 wedding on Onassis's private island of Scorpios was closer to a corporate acquisition than a romantic prelude. Multiple biographers describe extensive, adversarial sessions. Jackie's side sought guaranteed annual allowances, property rights, provisions for Caroline and John Jr., ironclad protections in the event of divorce or death. Onassis was acquiring something no shipping contract could purchase: the widow of an American president, and with her, a social legitimacy that elevated him from wealthy foreigner to global aristocrat. Both sides understood exactly what was being traded. The resulting prenuptial reportedly stipulated financial terms that guaranteed Jackie's security regardless of how the marriage developed. And every significant piece of jewelry Onassis gave Jackie during their union existed within the framework of that document. Simultaneously generosity and contractual obligation, with no clean line between the two. The Onassis-era jewelry reflected the scale of the arrangement. One piece that survived the full life cycle, gift, marriage, death, auction, secondary market, is a Grecian coin brooch with emerald adornments. 18-karat gold, designed as a wreath of delicate gold leaves, framing a genuine ancient Greek coin at its center. Small emerald accents providing flashes of green against warm yellow metal. The craftsmanship merges antiquity and modernity, a real artifact from classical Greece set into contemporary gold mounting, and the effect is richly textured, scholarly, rewarding extended examination. After traveling through the Sotheby's sale and subsequent private ownership, it resurfaced at Freeman's and Hindman's auction house, where it sold for $20,955. Respectable for a brooch, modest by Kennedy provenance standards. The market assigns tiered valuations to Jackie's pieces. Iconic items commanded six figures at the original auction, while pieces with less public visibility settled into a lower but still celebrity-inflated bracket. The Onassis-era gold pieces carried a provenance that elevated them far above their material value. Gifts from one of the richest men alive to the most glamorous woman in the world, within a marriage governed by a prenuptial contract brokered by a U.S. senator. Gold pieces are common at auction. Gold pieces that can be traced to a specific financial arrangement between two global figures aren't. The Onassis marriage deteriorated through the early 1970s, strained by mutual dissatisfaction and the grinding friction between two people whose reasons for marrying had always been as strategic as they were personal. By the time Aristotle fell seriously ill with myasthenia gravis, a degenerative autoimmune disease that progressively weakened his muscles. Multiple biographers report he was actively exploring a divorce from Jackie. He died on March 15, 1975, in Paris, before any divorce was finalized. His daughter, Christina Onassis, who had openly despised Jackie from the start, negotiated a settlement with her stepmother to relinquish all claims on the Onassis estate. The amount most consistently cited across biographical sources is approximately $26 million. Jackie took the money and walked away from the Onassis fortune. Any jewelry she retained through this settlement became part of that transaction, purchased, in effect, by her willingness to sign away her legal claims to a shipping empire worth vastly more. Christina wrote the check. Jackie kept the pieces. The ledger balanced. The pattern is undeniable. Joe Kennedy paid Jackie to stay in a marriage. Ted Kennedy brokered a prenuptial agreement that made the Onassis marriage a contractual arrangement. Christina Onassis paid Jackie approximately $26 million to leave the estate. At every stage, lawyers and accountants shaped the terms, and jewelry changed hands inside those terms. The Bouvier brooch from Blackjack, the one piece that arrived without conditions, only makes the pattern starker by contrast. After Onassis, Jackie built a genuinely independent life for the first time. She took a position as a book editor, first at Viking Press, then at Doubleday, working with authors, commissioning projects, earning her own salary. A choice that puzzled the social world but made perfect sense for a woman who had spent 2 decades watching what happened when your financial security depended entirely on someone else's signature. By the time of her death on May 19, 1994, her estate was reportedly valued at approximately $43.7 million, assembled from Kennedy trusts, the Onassis settlement, and her own editing career. She left that estate to Caroline and John Jr. What the children did with it's the part the sentimental narrative can't survive. April 23 through 26, 1996. Sotheby's York Avenue sales rooms. The auction house titled the event, "The Estate of Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis," and marketed it with the full force of their institutional machinery, a lavish catalog, public exhibition days that drew enormous crowds, shuffling past glass cases in hushed reverence, global media coverage that treated the event as part cultural happening, part national reckoning. Caroline Kennedy and John F. Kennedy Jr. consigned the estate as executors. Over 1,300 lots crossed the block over 4 days. Pre-sale estimates proved wildly conservative across virtually every category. Sotheby's specialists had assigned numbers based on material value and reasonable provenance premiums, but the buying floor operated on a different calculus entirely. Bidders, collectors, celebrity-obsessed buyers, Kennedy devotees, institutions, people who simply wanted to own a physical fragment of the myth, drove prices to multiples of their estimates with an almost frantic intensity. A simple footstool from Caroline's childhood sold for far beyond its intrinsic value because of whose house it had sat in. Lots that Sotheby's had estimated in the low thousands finished in the tens of thousands. Lots estimated in the tens of thousands finished in the hundreds of thousands. The sunburst brooch crossed the block alongside Van Cleef and Arpels pieces and the Onassis-era jewelry he had lavished on her during their union. The Schlumberger bangles scattered into private collections, each one carrying the distinctive Tiffany craftsmanship that had adorned Jackie's wrists. Objects biographers had described as intimate personal treasures were assigned lot numbers, photographed against neutral backgrounds, and sold to whoever raised the highest paddle. The final total? Approximately $34.4 million. One piece eventually reached a museum. The faux pearl necklace arrived at the Smithsonian by way of over 130,000 reproductions and a donation. But the bulk of the jewelry collection dispersed into private hands, scattered across collections belonging to people who never knew Jacqueline Kennedy, who bought a piece of mythology at market price and took it home in a Sotheby's bag. The Grecian coin brooch traveled through one owner's collection and resurfaced at Freeman's and Hinman's for $20,955, still trading on her name decades later, still carrying a premium that has nothing to do with 18-karat gold and everything to do with provenance. Pieces acquired through Joe Kennedy's guilt payments, through Ted Kennedy's prenuptial negotiations, through the settlement Christina Onassis underwrote, alongside the engagement ring Van Cleef redesigned, the Schlumberger bangles from Tiffany, and the faux pearls that somehow sold for more than real ones, all of it crossed an auction block and converted back into the one thing it had always really been: cash. Caroline and John didn't keep the jewelry. They kept the money, and that approximately $34.4 million, split between two heirs who grew up watching their mother navigate the precise financial value of every relationship she entered, was the most honest thing anyone in this story ever did with those pieces. They stopped pretending the collection was sentimental. They acknowledged what it had always been: currency, dressed in sapphires and rubies and gold, finally stripped of its disguise. Every jewel in this collection told a story about leverage, about negotiation, about a woman who understood, from the moment the Bouvier fortune crumbled around her father's charm, that beautiful objects require someone else's money, and that money always comes with terms. Subscribe for more stories like this.